session's called The Creative Way to Beat Burnout, and it's meant to be a reset for women in STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and math, because that's my background. And it's definitely, we spend a lot of time on the logical side, and I wanted to bring more the art and creativity back. And you'll see why there's a lot of science-based reasons for that. So the subtitle is How to Complete the Stress Cycle to Reset Your Energy, Find Space to Breathe. And much of this material is brought together from a book called Burnout, written by two sisters, Amelia and Emily Nagoski. And then it's also bringing in some reflections I've had from doing various art therapy exercises as well. So I'm a bit of a magpie. I collect a lot of information and then I try to put it together in a story that makes sense. So just again, wanted to say welcome to everyone. So this session is something about we don't talk about enough in STEM, that the toll that stress takes, not just intellectually, but also physically and emotionally. And we're going to go beyond self-care as a buzzword, and we're going to get into the real mechanisms behind burnout. And as I mentioned, this masterclass is inspired by the book Burnout. And the reason I've paired science with creativity today is simple. We don't just need information. We do need some tools that help to reconnect us with our bodies, with meaning, and also with each other. So you're in the right place if you feel guilty for resting, but you still can't catch up. You love your STEM career, but the burnout is real. You're waking up tired no matter how early you go to bed. You've tried various self-care things, but none of it seems to really stick or work for you. So I want you to keep in mind that burnout isn't always loud. Sometimes it's silent. You're still hitting all your deadlines, but you're feeling a bit numb inside. It looks like having a job you once loved, but now you're waking up every day with a bit of a sense of dread sometimes. And it is often invisible in environments like STEM, where pushing through is the norm and slowing down feels a bit like failure. And one of the most powerful insights I had from the book Burnout is that you can't take burnout as a personal flaw. It is physiological and it is a systemic outcome, especially for high achieving women who've been trained to both overgive and overfunction. So I just want you to take a deep breath that you're in the right place, and we're going to talk about some tools to deal with burnout. Okay, so what you're going to learn today is why burnout isn't just stress. It's what actually happens when stress gets stuck. We're going to talk about the hidden trap that helps keeping us high achieving women in STEM feeling overwhelmed. We're going to talk about 3 simple strategies that are going to help you reset your energy and protect your focus. And then I'll talk a little bit about a group coaching program that I've designed later on as well. So I want you to think of today as a soft reset. You're going to leave with some tools that work with your nervous system, not against it. And you're going to start understanding why certain strategies like pausing, drawing, or even just simple laughter with a friend can do more for your health than just pushing through yet another task. And this is based in the neuroscience of completing the stress cycle, which helps explain why sometimes when you just remove the stressors, be this, the toxic boss, the project deadline, doesn't actually make the stress go away. You actually have to physically complete the stress response. Otherwise, it stays in your body. So this is about relief, but it's also about learning how to respond, not just always react. And, certainly if this speaks to you, I can tell you how you can take it further through the small group coaching program. And this is designed to help you reset through some creative tools and a bit of structured reflection. So, quick icebreaker. Imagine it's 6 months from now and burnout is no longer running the show. What feels different in your day? What's one thing that shifted? And I want you to keep in mind, this isn't just, a visualization exercise for productivity. This is meant to be a personal check-in. So if burnout wasn't in the driver's seat anymore, what would that free up in your life? Would you have more patience, more sleep, more time for movement, or just, simply enjoyment? And sometimes we think we need to overhaul everything just to feel better. But I want to remind you that, wellness isn't a final destination. You don't just suddenly arrive and feel great. It's more about moving through the daily stress with more awareness and support. So this is just an overview of some of the agenda we're going through and the expectations. So unpacking the signs of burnout and why, simply resting doesn't feel like it's working for you. A bit of the hidden pressures that keep you stuck. As I mentioned, 3 simple tools. And then we will be doing an actual live activity, a burnout reset. So for that, you just need pen or paper and pencil, whatever easier for you. So this session is going to follow the arc of awareness from insight to action. We're going to explore why traditional self-care doesn't work when you're stuck in the stress cycle. And then we're going to look at the hidden burnout traps, especially for women in STEM, where the game is often rigged. It's asking us to do more than is humanly sustainable. We'll do the one creative reset tool during the session, and it is just a few minutes, and there's no art skills required for this. Meant to be very easy and straightforward. And the goal of this activity is to help your body and brain feel a little more regulated, a little less on and a little more present. And yep, there's going to be a chance to continue on after today. But again, I just want to iterate, there's no pressure. This is about just giving you some options and not obligations. Okay, so what is burnout? You can think of burnout being chronic stress plus an unfinished stress cycle. And there's 3 core components. There's the emotional exhaustion where you feel drained even after resting. There's the depersonalization where you may be feeling numb or cynical about your work. And reduced accomplishment, like nothing you do really matters or counts. So burnout isn't just about being tired. It's when your whole body is stuck in the stress mode, even after the stressor is gone. So you can remove the deadline, you can finish the project, take the vacation, and you still may come back and feel a bit hollow or wired or just exhausted. And that's because your stress response hasn't been completed. So, the real danger isn't the stress itself, it's the chronic unprocessed stress that's staying in your body day after day. And if we don't learn to release it, it does accumulate. And that's why burnout shows up physically in us. It could show up as brain fog, simple illnesses, sleep disruption, or just that emotional numbness. So if you felt like something's been wrong with you for being this tired, this disconnected, this fed up, it's not a personal flaw. It's actually basic physiology. It's the stress that's living in your system. So burnout in STEM, why does it hit women harder? There's always this pressure to perform at 110%, feeling you have to prove yourself again and again. Overwork is praised, recovery is ignored or swept under the rug. And there's no built-in system to help you reset. STEM environments often reward overwork, but for women, there's another layer to keep in mind. You're not just doing the actual job, you're proving that you deserve to be in the room to do the job. That often means working harder to be taken seriously, to be visible, to not be mistaken for the assistant in the corner of the room. And the irony is the more competent you are, the more responsibilities you're given, and often without more support to support those activities. So burnout in this context isn't just simple exhaustion, it's a bit of moral injury. You're doing your best inside a system that isn't built to support your well-being. The book Burnout calls this a rigged game. And, framing that helps to shift the blame away from you and more towards the system that's demanding too much and is actually giving you back too little. So, why are you still feeling exhausted? This is the key takeaway I want you to keep in mind, that stress and stressors are not the same. So, a stressor is the deadline, the toxic boss, the expectations that are unrealistic. Stress is what happens in your body in response to that. So removing the stressor doesn't necessarily clear away the stress. Stress is a biological process. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the biggest problem is most of us never actually get to the end of the cycle. We don't complete the cycle. It's like your body is gearing to run from a tiger, and now the tiger's gone, but your muscles are still tense, your heart's still racing, and your cortisol levels are still through the roof. So, animals naturally release stress. Humans tend to suppress it. We've learned to keep this on the inside. If you can think, often when I walk my dog and he runs to another strange dog, we get past it and he literally shakes off the stress. He shakes his whole body and then carries on like, the day is fine. So we don't tend to do that. Unless we complete the stress movement, and this can be done in various ways, which we'll get into, movement, breath, expression, social connection, it stays stuck. And this stuck stress doesn't just make you tired, it can actually make you actually sick. So how do we get unstuck? We need to complete the stress cycle. And definitely one of the best ways, as I mentioned, best studied and most effective way of doing this is movement. That can just be simply, it doesn't have to be a gym workout. It can be walking around the block, stretching in your chair, or, if you're home, just dancing along, alone in your kitchen. Some other great ways to get through the cycle is deep breathing, especially long, slow exhales. You may have heard of the box breathing, where you can, breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, breathe out for 4 counts, and then you repeat. And that slows and triggers the body into a state of relaxation. The other thing is just simple social connection, a laughter, they talk about laughter being the best medicine, just that's a way of signaling that you're safe again. And what we're going to cover today, in addition to all these, is that creative expression counts as well as completing the cycle. So this could be drawing, this could be journaling, singing, even just, mindful doodling. And these methods signal to your nervous system that you are safe now. So the danger's past, the body can let it go. And I just want to iterate that you don't need to do all these at once. One of these strategies, whichever, feels good to you, practiced regularly is enough to start changing your baseline of where you may be feeling the stress. So again, you don't need to do all of them. It isn't a trick question. There's no best method. There's just what actually feels right for you. So we are conditioned to believe if we can't overhaul everything, we shouldn't bother. But I do want to remind you that, small actions done consistently actually can change our biology over time. So, pick a method that fits your life today, not your ideal life, right? Wellness is a process. It's not a final destination. So that may be taking a slow breath before your next meeting. Maybe it's just texting a friend. Maybe it's getting up and stretching for, a minute or two and walking around. I want you to notice how choosing a method helps to shift your mindset from feeling, stuck to feeling more supported in your body. So why does burnout hit us so hard? And again, this comes back to being taught to being overworking, overgiving, and always being on. This is where we start to challenge the story that many of us carry, that if we're burned out, we must be doing something wrong. But I want you to reframe this. So, women, especially in a professional or caregiving roles, are taught to overfunction. We are taught to perform, we're taught to give, we're taught to produce, and we are taught to keep smiling through it all. We often internalize the idea that our worth comes from being endlessly available to others. So, even if we know we're exhausted, guilt stops us from resting. It stops us from saying, no, I don't need to do that right now. And this isn't necessarily about individual choices. There is a cultural script, and that script is broken. So burnout becomes almost inevitable when we live in a system that's expecting more from us than it is willing to give back and support us. So I want you to keep in mind that burnout isn't a personal failure, but it's likely a sign that you've been carrying more than one human's worth of responsibility. The problem isn't just stress, it's the pressure of being everything for everyone. So, why does it feel wrong to rest even when you need it? So, the book Burnout calls this the human giver syndrome, the idea that women are meant to be the givers of energy, of calm, of care and support, but not receivers. And when you're socialized to be a giver, rest feels selfish. Saying no feels like letting people down. Even being seen as tired can feel like you're not doing enough. And this mindset shows up everywhere from over volunteering at work to skipping lunch to answer people's emails. And the end result is that you learn to disconnect from your own needs. And, it's not just exhausting, it's actually dehumanizing because you're not a machine, you're a whole person and your needs are not meant to be a burden. So I want you to think that rest isn't a reward for being productive. It is actually a biological requirement, and it's not one that you feel like you should have to earn to get that rest. Which leads me to the perfectionism loop. So the issue with perfectionism is it doesn't push you forward, it keeps you stuck. It often feels like ambition, but it's really about safety. If I'm perfect, I won't be criticized. If I don't make mistakes, I'll finally feel enough. But I want to remind you that perfectionism doesn't prevent burnout. It's going to accelerate it because you can never win. There's always something else you should be doing better. And definitely in STEM environments, that pressure is amplified by high stakes environments and constant evaluation. We often push ourselves to the edge thinking it'll just prove our value, but usually it just ends up depleting our energy more. And, if you've ever stayed late just to look committed, or you've rewritten something 1,000 times just to avoid being judged on it, you're not alone. That's not a weakness. That's the perfectionism loop. And, I'm here to show that there are some ways out of that loop. You know, STEM culture does reward the hustle, but it doesn't necessarily make you better at your job. So big boundaries can feel intimidating. And that's why these micro boundaries are really powerful because they help to interrupt burnout before it escalates. So these are three micro boundaries that help to protect your energy. So first of all, there's the 5-minute no. And this is where you pause before automatically saying yes. It gives you space to check in before committing to the ask. Next, there's the me first rule. And this is starting your day with one small thing just for you. This helps to reclaim the start of your day before your energy gets hijacked by all the tasks going on. And lastly, the third micro boundary is the permission slip. You can literally write this down or just make a mental note. Think about one thing that you're allowing yourself today to do. It helps override that guilt voice that says you should be doing more. So, what's important here is that these aren't about being defiant, they're about being intentional with your choices. When we protect our energy in small ways, we signal to our nervous system that I'm safe. I'm not on fire. I can actually rest now. And you don't have to say no to everything, but if you pause first, you get to choose what you actually want to do. And stories help us see what's possible. So this is Sarah, software engineer. And, you know, like us, she's constantly feeling overwhelmed by everything in her life, her work, juggling all the things. And, she didn't quit her job or change her whole life. She started with one simple shift, taking a pause before she said yes. And that gave her enough space to check. Do I have the capacity? Is this aligned with what's mattered to me? So the result isn't just fewer commitments, it was more energy, some more clarity, and also more confidence in her choices. And, that's definitely the beauty of having this burnout recovery. Within weeks, her stress dropped and her focus came back. So I want you to keep in mind, it doesn't require a grand gesture. It often begins with just, a single simple choice that feels different than the old pattern. And, we don't necessarily need more willpower. You just need more permission to choose what you actually want to do. Okay, so we're going to pause now and actually try doing one of these reset tools. So this is where science meets practice. And again, I just want to iterate, you don't need artistic skill. You don't even need to like drawing, just have a pen and paper handy. And this is called the small wins pathway. So the point is to shift your attention from thinking to sensing. So moving from a productivity mode to being more presence, a presence mode. This is a way to complete the stress cycle using visual expression. So your body can process what your brain has been carrying. And again, I just want to say there's no right way to do this. You can't get it wrong. So grab a pen and paper. We're going to do a quick visual reflection. And it's not about artistic skill. It is about seeing the progress you've already made. Okay, so step one, we're going to draw your path. So what I'd like you to do is start by drawing a curvy or a zigzag line across the page. And this line represents the past few weeks of your life. So your personal path through stress, through the efforts you've gone through, and maybe even some quiet wins. Again, I just want to say this isn't about drawing something beautiful. It's just a way to give visual form to your experience. So you're literally mapping out the terrain you've been walking. Don't overthink it. This is just a container for the next step. So this represents your path over the past few weeks. You don't need to overthink it. Just let your pen move across the page. And I want you to consider this your burnout to reset line. Okay. So step 2, you're going to add your wins. So now look back along that path. Where were the moments that you made a choice for your own well-being, even if it was just tiny? A day you closed your laptop on time, a moment you may have said no to overcommitting to a task, a deep breath you took before reacting. These are small wins, and your nervous system notices them. In the book Burnout, it talks about what they call the monitor, and that's part of your brain that tracks progress. It's what fuels hope in our system. So even one small step towards relief can reset that system. So I want you to write down your small wins. And then I want you to mark them with a simple symbol, something personal to you. You could add a heart, you could add a star, flower, something that symbolizes what that meant to you at the time. And, this helps you to realize, you're not just actually like hanging in there. You're not just surviving. You're actually moving forward on your path. You've had some wins. You're moving forward. And this is what I want you to realize is that this is how burnout recovery begins with the recognition of the wins that you've done. You might be further along than you thought you were. So take a breath and take a look at your path. What does your path reveal? What does it show you? Maybe you've done more than you've realized. We have a habit of glossing over our wins and just focusing in on the problems, the challenges. I want you to see if there's some patterns or some gaps. Recognize where the visual strengths are. Where have you succeeded? I just want to remind you that, we don't need to overhaul our lives. We just need to have some awareness and some recovery rituals that meet us where we are. So take a breath, look at your drawing. Where have you created a bit of space for yourself? What helped you move forward on this path, even just a little bit? So this drawing becomes one of those rituals. It is something small, but it's also something private, but it's also something real. It's something tangible. You've put some experiences that lived in your head physically on paper. You can take a look at it. It's an artifact of your experience now. And, if there's a word or symbol that stood out for you, drop it into the chat. Somebody else may be reflecting on that as well. Okay, so what comes next? So now that you have sort of an overview of what burnout is, what would real relief look like to you? So if you had weekly support, creative tools, time to reflect without, as I said, overhauling your whole life. And that's what I designed the 12-week creative reset program for. And the program is about moving from the survival mode to more of a sustainable reset. And what we'll do over the 12 weeks is we build a creative toolkit for stress relief. And it is a small supportive group of women in STEM who get it. We've all been in the trenches. We know what it feels like. This means you don't have to carry burnout alone or wait for time to, the solution to magically appear to it. It's about making some space for yourself bit by bit with some tools that'll actually fit into your life. Each session is going to help you reconnect with what matters and help you feel a bit more grounded again. And the best thing about having peer support is, you're no longer the one trying to hold it all together by yourself. So this program helps to create some structure and a bit of breathing room. And so instead of trying to fix burnout with, solo efforts, you're going to work alongside others who understand the pressure of STEM careers. And I am limiting the cohort. I do want it to be a small group, just 10 women per cohort. And what we're going to do each week is we're going to do some live coaching with reflective exercises, and we're going to use creative activities to both shift the stress physically and emotionally out of our systems. The power of being seen and heard by others in similar shoes, that is a reset all on its own. Sharing stories, I'd say war stories, but, I don't want to think of being that hard. But having similar scenarios that we've all gone through, that really does help. These weekly sessions with space to ask questions and build connections. And I am taking a science-backed approach to stress relief. There's a lot of neuroscience that backs up the creativity exercises. And these results aren't just personal, they actually ripple into having effect on the quality of your work, into your clarity of focus at work, and also just confidence of showing up in your day. So each session is going to focus on a different aspect of burnout recovery, like the boundaries we touched on briefly, energy drains or perfectionism. I start with coaching tools, I add short creative exercises on to process what comes up, and then we take time to reflect as a group and share some of the scenarios of what came up. The nice thing about having a small group size is it does build a container of safety and trust. You'll have space to share, be witnessed, and you get to learn from the insights of others as well. I found that some of the most powerful breakthroughs come from hearing someone else say that, what you've been feeling, but you didn't have the words for, and suddenly they said it, and you're like, oh, that's exactly what was in my head. That was what I was going through. And again, this isn't just a feel-good workshop. It is grounded in how your nervous system actually works. I find creative coaching helps to regulate the stress responses. It's going to help you integrate your emotions and also help you rewire, literally rewire your brain on how you respond to overwhelm. You're going to get some real insight into your patterns, but also you're going to practice doing things differently with both support from me and from the members of the group. The group structure is going to add a layer of consistency and motivation that's kind of hard to create on your own. Like you can do a lot of self-study, but I do find having the accountability helps bring some motivation in moving things forward. And you're going to learn to reset your stress in ways that are both, gentle. These are meant to be fun activities but also effective. They do move the stress away. So it is based on neuroscience, on psychology and nervous system regulation. And, you know, I've tried to design it for real life. They're meant to be short, digestible, and things you can work with, practical. So once I'm done presenting, I'm going to drop the link in the chat so you can take a look at it. Certainly, if you do have any questions about the program, I encourage you to reach out to me for a clarity call. This is basically a 30-minute call with me, and you get a taste of my coaching style. We get to talk about what kind of support would serve you best personally. And, you don't need to have it all figured out, just willingness to try something different. So the women who've done this work have often said the biggest shift wasn't just in how they felt, but how they thought about themselves. They stopped apologizing for needing rest. They spoke up more at work. They reconnected with, what made them click, what made them feel alive again, have that sense of joy, the spark. And they didn't do it alone. Peer coaching adds depth. When somebody else reflects your thoughts back to you, it lands differently. You feel seen. So the way I designed this program, it's both to help you have the inner reset and the outer support to sustain it. So again, I call it a bonus gift, but honestly, just have a call with me. It's meant to be a chance to see what this work feels like. We're going to look at how burnout shows up for you personally. We'll try doing a simple drawing exercise, bit of reflective journaling, and even sometimes just that phone call is enough to experience a shift, a spark, and something that's changed for you, some different insights. You get a chance to ask any questions about the group format, the weekly structure, or whether it's a fit for you now or in the future. So you can think of it as a preview, not a commitment. But yeah, if you're feeling drawn to it, trust that instinct. It's worth exploring. And obviously, this is the thing that I hear most commonly, I don't have the time. And I totally get it. When you're feeling burnt out, the thought of adding something else just feels exhausting. But I do want to share the truth is burnout is not necessarily going to resolve itself. It won't go away when your schedule clears or the project wraps up or you take that one weekend off from work because the stress is still living in your body. And the way I designed this program is it's for your burned out self, not your ideal self. You don't need to carve out hours of time, even just 10 minutes a day to quietly reflect, try one of the exercises, that's enough. So, if you're waiting for the perfect time to feel better, this is it. This is what you can keep in mind. Burnout doesn't fix itself, but these small shifts do make a real difference. And that little drawing you made today, that's proof your reset doesn't have to be dramatic to be meaningful. Small steps matter. And when you take them consistently with the right kind of support, change does become possible. That's what I designed this program for, creating a series of small guided resets that move you from, just getting through the day to actually feeling more like yourself again. And, do it in a group. You don't have to do it alone. The support and structure are, here when you're ready. These small insights, creative tools, all that support does add up to real change. So let's come back to where we started. Burnout isn't just about stress, it's about all the ways we get stuck in expectations, feeling the isolation and over functioning, over giving. Today we unpacked why women in STEM are especially vulnerable and how even just these small boundary shifts can begin to free up your time and your energy and reset your nervous system. You tried a short creative reset. You felt what 5 minutes of space can do, and now you have the option to keep going because, your work does matter, but so do you. And, I want you to think recovery isn't a luxury, it is a human right. You are allowed to rest, and you don't feel like you have to justify that. So, I'm wrapping up towards the end of the presentation. I just want to say, thank you for showing up, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, trying this activity. I know it does take effort to show up for something like this, especially when you're already feeling stretched thin. So I do want to honor that. Thank you for coming. There's one message I hope you're leaving with is, you're not broken. You're not failing. You're just feeling a little burnt out, and there is a way through. These small shifts you made today, whether it's taking a deep breath, that line on the page, or, a simple moment of reflection, all of that matters. They're not trivial. These are powerful shifts because they're intentional. You're taking time to reflect and make these choices. And definitely, if it's something you're interested in, I'd love for you to join the program in the fall and take it a little bit further with me. But, even if you only carry one insight forward from today, that's enough. You've got something you've got in your creative toolkit to carry you forward. And again, I want you to remember, you don't have to do more to be worthy of rest. You already are worthy. So take care of yourself. Reach out to me if you have any questions, and making space to breathe. So thank you for being here.